This is Autoline This Week, the show that gets you inside the global automotive industry. Underwriting for the production of Autoline This Week has been provided by RSM.
Prepare for challenges specific to your business by working with trusted advisors who help turn obstacles into opportunities. Experience the power of being understood. RSM, Audit, Tax, and Consulting for the Middle Market.
And now, here's your host, John McElroy.
I want to thank you all for joining us on Autoline This Week. Hey, it's the end of the year. We've got a wrap-up. What were the big stories? In fact, it's more than the end of a year. It's the end of a decade. To get a good insight as to what's gone on in the auto industry, I've invited three of my colleagues to join us this morning, including Joe White from Reuters, Jamie Butters from Automotive News, and David Welch from Bloomberg News. And good to have the three of you here.
Thanks very much.
Like I said, Jamie, we'll start with you. Everybody pile in because there's so much to talk about here. The end of a decade, when historians look back at this decade, and especially 2019, what's going to stand out for them?
I mean, these are the best of times, right? We went from the worst, the bankruptcies of GM and FCA back in 2009, several years of increases, record sales, several consecutive years above 17 million, profitability. It's been just an incredible decade, and yet we're ending on a pretty sour note. We've got GM suing FCA, Nissan about to furlough all their people for 2 days. It's despite all the success, it doesn't feel great anymore.
It is weird because I mean, just on the numbers historically, global vehicle demand is good. It's not as great as it was a couple of years ago, but it's good. The United States market is strong. Average transaction prices are going up and up and up, and yet everyone's acting like it's the end of the world. I mean, you've got the German companies, talking about big job cuts over time. GM has restructured, closed plants. Ford has restructured. FCA has got problems, which plenty.
And we'll get into that.
And we'll get into that. And obviously, their ultimate thing is, hey, we got to merge with Peugeot, or else we don't have a future. So yeah, it's this weird kind of cognitive dissonance that's going on, where the environment around on paper looks fine, but the behavior of the companies suggests that they're scared to death.
Yeah, that's why I think the decade, if you will, and also the years, it's the rebirth and then the existential threat of the auto industry. And I think that's why you see all these cuts and really running lean in a way that they didn't before. Because the fear it's about cash, right? They're spending so much money on EVs and autonomous vehicles, although we can get into this later if we want to, but I think the AV ride-hailing threat is way overblown. The real threat here is that people want these EVs before they can actually make real money on them.
Yeah, the problem is regulators love electric vehicles. People like SUVs, and until you electrify SUVs, which many of the companies are planning to do, again, it's a cognitive dissonance thing. It's the companies are being pressured to do EVs and spend the money, huge money, but at the same time, the EV demand is still small.
Demand is small and the costs are too high. They are unprofitable vehicles almost across the board. And so, yeah, I think that is a big draw. You hit it on the head. That's the root cause of the anxiety is the tens of billions of dollars that all these big companies have to invest into electric vehicles that may or may not ever produce a return on that invested capital.
So the end of the decade piece of this. So in 2010, this was all these issues that we're all discussing right now were sort of a distant issue. They were not like within the business cycle plan that they were working on in 2010.
They could still whistle by the graveyard, I think.
Well, right, it was still sort of, that's a problem someday. Now, someday has arrived, and that's why I think you're seeing a lot of this kind of, we got to do this now.
But why, if sales are strong, even though the global market is slowing down, like you say, Joe, we're still, 90 million new vehicles a year or whatever it is in the U.S., still going strong. Why all this restructuring? GM, what was it, 2 years ago, started cutting 14,000 employees. I think Ford went after 7,000. Now, just in the last month, the German auto industry has essentially said, 50, 60,000 jobs are going to go in the next few years. What's driving all of it?
Well, first off, the European market's in lousy shape. So there's excess capacity, there are cuts there. The Chinese market is in full retreat, right? I mean, the sales are way down. GM used to make $500 million a quarter there. Now it's like,
in terms of profit.
yeah, now it's like $250 million a quarter they're making, $260, stuff like that. So, and you're seeing companies lay off there. People are having to retrench. Here, the market's still good. They're just having to work harder to get it. And there was excess capacity before. The other thing is, we touched on this in the green room, no one wants to sell cars to poor people anymore. So that means a profit-rich but sales-restricted U.S. market. I mean, we're doing 17 million. If they did things the old way, where we had a bunch of $19,000 and $17,000 compact cars and small SUVs that we're foisting on dealers with huge rebates, it would probably be an 18.5 million market with the kind of demand that's out there. But it's not. All those people are buying used cars now. They're buying all the stuff that's off lease. And instead, the new cars are all averaging $35,000, $36,000. It's a very profitable way to do business. Shareholders like it, but it's it means your volume is less. And look, if we've switched to expensive SUVs instead of small vehicles, you can add a shift or you can run that line faster. But that passenger car plant has got to go. And that's why you see
the pressure on North America to deliver the profits, to make up for China's retreat, to make up for the high costs of tech that they're demanding in Europe, to have predominantly hybrids and plug-in hybrids be sold and take on those losses. They need pickups and SUVs in the U.S. and just making a 5% margin in North America maybe isn't good enough. You've got to keep squeezing it.
It needs to be a 10% margin, and you're right. I mean, I think that's something to watch going forward in the next few years. I mean, automakers are going to talk about electric vehicles, and they're going to try, to continue the North American truck franchise if they have one. Again, why does Peugeot want to merge with FCA? Well, there's a bunch of reasons, but one of them is that they get access to the Ram and Jeep franchises and the cash that's coming out of that they can then use to finance whatever it is that they've got to do in Europe to comply with the CO2 rules. And I think that that regulatory cliff is something that all these companies are looking at and saying, "Oh my gosh, that's a big cliff." Are we ready to climb that? Kind of the answer is no to some large extent. So hence you see all this kind of strategizing going on and calling up bankers and all the rest.
So in affordability, I mean, that's what you guys are talking about here, becoming a huge issue for the industry, or certainly in the U.S. market. The average price of a new vehicle is what, $36,000?
That was luxury car money a few years ago.
It was luxury car money just a little while ago. When does it hit 40 grand? When does the average price of a new car hit 40 grand? I don't think we're that far away from it happening.
Mm-hmm. With all the technology that's being required and demanded by consumers, right? I mean, who would buy anything that doesn't have adaptive cruise and lane keep assist, as well as emergency braking and all the other technology we've come to know and love? So they keep getting more expensive. It is a better business selling high-priced goods to wealthy people. So yeah, it's heading that way, and it's a big concern for dealers, right? They are struggling with the volume. The retail volume is not what it was last year, even though we had better than expected year this year. They're under a lot of pressure, and they're having to find ways to make money outside of their core business of selling new vehicles.
Just briefly, I mean, and we could have a whole other show on this, but the retail sector of this industry has resisted change for decades, and I do wonder how much longer that will be true. Because the new car margins, you can look at the public dealerships, the new car margins are single digits at best. And that business is, whether they like it or not, is changing, and just don't know that you're going to have the same structure. That the same structure can survive long term in the next decade that it managed to survive this decade.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. I mean, we see automakers, and we've talked a little bit about that, cutting tens of thousands of jobs. We're seeing suppliers do the same thing. In fact, suppliers are splitting in two, spinning off their old tech, really promoting their new tech. The retail end of the business really hasn't made those kinds of changes, not yet.
Well, I agree with all of that. The new car business actually often loses money at dealerships. The used car business, the margins are down, but think about what we're saying with affordability. For a lot of people, as a matter of fact, 2/3 or 3/4 of the entire vehicle market in the U.S., including used, is used, right? So there's a lot of volume to be done. One thing that's pushing this 17 million market, by the way, is a lot of leasing still. So those cars come off of lease, and that's what the people who can't afford the $36,000 new car are buying is that off-lease vehicle, 2 or 3 years old, that still has some technology and a lot of miles left on it. So the dealers can survive on that. The real problem I think they're going to have is their parts and service business, where they really print money, is going to be under pressure. As you have over-the-air updates.
Yeah, over-the-air update.
Yeah,
I think
where you can just beam a radio signal into a car and make it better.
It's taken the legacy automakers too long to figure out that's a must. I mean, Elon Musk showed them that 6 years ago, something like that, or more.
Since
or
2011.
Yeah, right.
Tesla's been doing over-the-air updates.
But finally, you're seeing the incumbents kind of getting around to that, and
still a year away.
But it's. I think it's maybe a couple years away as opposed to a full product cycle away. So I agree with what David is saying, that starts to some of that takes some of takes some of the bread off the table for dealers, and back to the point about at some point that has an effect.
In the way that Tesla disrupted and yet isn't steadily profitable, and so automakers are kind of warily watching what do we want to learn, what do we want to emulate, such as selling EVs that are high priced and for a good reason, can attract a real sticker price. The one to watch, I think, in retail is Carvana, which is growing really rapidly, still not profitable, but it's because they're investing in their model. How that evolves over the next 10 years will tell a lot.
Thumbnail, what does Carvana do for those who don't
They
know?
sell predominantly online, right? And that's what we're seeing more dealers try to do, whether it's with their new vehicles and especially their used. Again, the quality is so high, the reliability is so high. If you have a 7-day, 10-day return policy, whether you're buying, from a vending machine, or buying online, or you buy it from a store, you just go in, give me my car, let me get out of here in less than an hour, and if I don't like it, I'll come back, because if I bought a Equinox, you've got 30 more Equinoxes, I'll just trade it for one of the other ones.
At what point does this political moat that dealers have built by essentially lobbying and buying off state houses across the country, not in an illegal way, I don't mean.
No. It's a democracy. It's all good.
At what point does that moat get crossed?
That's a good question.
Because Tesla has already set precedents. In fact, there's a very interesting opinion from the FTC on these Tesla cases that says, and now this is mostly about Tesla, but they basically say that the reason franchise laws exist is to protect dealers from company-owned stores. Right? And so since Tesla doesn't have any franchise dealers, the FTC basically said, well, this is our opinion on that, and so this can be used elsewhere, but we're not going to come down and say that Tesla has to have franchise dealers or that franchise dealers are a bad idea, but we're just saying that, Tesla doesn't have franchise dealers, so this is okay.
What happened to that?
But if you have that out there.
Yeah, well, you do have it out there because the state of Michigan banned Tesla from selling any cars. In fact, it's even illegal for Tesla to service cars that somehow made their way to the state.
And yet they're everywhere.
And yet they're
here
everywhere.
In Detroit, anyway. Yeah.
But anyway, they sued the state of Michigan, Tesla did, and that was like 3 years ago or something. I thought that
case is still wending, as far as I know, that case is still wending its way through the courts. And I looked into this a while ago, but that could be a very important case, because if Tesla wins and is able to use that case as a wedge to kind of open up the whole question of whether franchise laws are legit and in what circumstances they can apply and what they can't. That could be a really big deal.
Totally agree, because they filed in federal court. So, this has huge implications.
There are a lot of startup brands, a lot of foreign brands that really would prefer not to have a dealer network, even though there are arguably advantages to it as well.
But so what happens if the FTC is saying the only real reason that franchise laws should be in place is to protect small businesses from getting pounded on by a company-owned store, and the companies have no intention, they still don't really, of owning stores. It's really, the change we're talking about would be somebody like Carvana web-based selling that doesn't require
Carvana gets around that because they're selling used cars and all that. But the question is, can you also when does it get extended to? When does Amazon get a dealer license? Or Walmart, which is that kind of comes and goes. But anyway, I just think it's you're talking about sort of this decade, next decade. I do think that the question about how long do the moats continue to keep the barbarians away from the retail side of the business is a good one to ask.
Well, you're right. I mean, the automakers don't want to own stores. They do want to own that customer relationship. And if they can sell online directly, I mean, Ford's been looking at it, sniffing around at it for like 20 years, right? If they could sell directly and just let the dealers have maybe the service business, a lot of them would probably be glad to do that. But they're not actively trying. They're working, glad to have their dealer partners to soak up inventory when they need them.
The automakers, particularly the domestics, but I would put Toyota in this group too, and probably Honda. They've always kind of avoided, I wouldn't say always, I'd say since the late 90s when fights with dealers blew up in their faces. They have now avoided that kind of fight with the dealers. And I think even if they did online sales, they would be happy to cut the dealer in. I'm talking about like third party. When does Silicon Valley get in on the act and get past the politics and really start to invade that space? It is ripe for disruption because a lot of people don't like the process.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about another group that could be deeply threatened in the next decade, the UAW. It's already got plenty of problems right now. Joe, what's the future for the union long term?
Well, yeah, so first of all, I mean, I think there's a kind of a short to medium term dimension of that, and there's a long term dimension of that. The short to medium term dimension, to me, I mean, everybody knows, I mean, they're under investigation by the feds. There's really a remarkable interview given by the lead prosecutor in the case to Robert Snell of the Detroit News, where the prosecutor basically said, we have not at all taken off the table the possibility that the federal government might seek to take control of the United Auto Workers Union. Rory Gamble, the new president, is trying very hard to avoid that, trying to show that they're going to get their act together. And that's going to be a short-term disruption. The long-term disruption, which the union itself has acknowledged, is, and we've been talking about it all through this, that as the automakers move to electrified vehicles and as they automate, as manufacturing automation continues to advance, you're going to have a situation where, doesn't matter what's in the contract. These companies need fewer people in the factories, and the people there are going to have to be differently trained with different skills. And that is a big challenge to the UAW. The union knows it, and because they put out this great white paper on electrification and sort of the threat, but they're going to have to do more than that to remain relevant. And this scandal over corruption, I think, really is going to put a lot of pressure on the union and its leaders to just rethink, like, why is the union relevant? What is the purpose of the United Auto Workers Union? What service are they really providing to their members? Because otherwise, don't forget, Michigan's a right to work state. Ohio's a right to work state. These others, Kentucky, right, is a right to work. I mean, there's a lot of the states where UAW people work for the Detroit Three are now right to work states. And worst case scenario is that members will say, you know what?
Not going to pay my dues anymore.
Not going to pay my dues.
It also, I mean, among the many problems that this scandal has revealed, it virtually ensures that they will never organize a plant in the South. They got a little bit closer with VW and Nissan, and there's just no way that you can make that sales pitch to a worker at Hyundai or Kia or Toyota or anywhere else, then say, why am I going to pay my dues if they're just going to steal them, and they're not going to really represent me?
Yeah. The UAW is already not very good at organizing plants, period, no matter where they are. I don't think they organize, I mean, they've been organizing nurses and other types of workers.
Casino workers and teaching assistants in colleges.
You need it.
This is a very, very public scandal and investigation, and some have already gone to jail and some will, and there will be more indictments. We had an interview with Matt Schneider, the U.S. attorney, as well, and he said that the investigation's about half over, but they're getting more tips all the time, so maybe it's not half over. There's a lot more to come on this. For the union long term, I don't think they organize a plant for a generation. I mean, it's going to be really difficult for them. So in that case, they're managing decline, and GM's a great example of this. What did GM close? GM closed 3 plants as part of the latest contract. 2 of them were transmission plants, right? 1 in Warren and 1 in Baltimore. They're building a battery plant with a Korean partner, LG Chem, in Lordstown. Mary Barr did say something very interesting yesterday at the press conference. We had all sort of assumed that since they talked about the Lordstown plant with the tentative agreement, that it was just going to be part of it was not governed by the master agreement, but it would just be organized. And she said, well, the workers will have to decide that.
Legally, she's got to say that, though. She does.
Well, but I agree with David. It's a significant
It's a very significant thing because GM's not just doing we're just going to pull you in and give you another contract and everyone's automatically union. The union's got to go in there and do the hard work. And GM knows better than anybody since they just filed a civil suit against FCA over the union's corruption.
Next topic coming up.
That it's going to be, this publicity is going to make it tough on the union. So, now they've got to organize this. And by the way, for anyone else making EVs, battery-powered vehicles, a lot of those electric motors and a lot of those batteries are imported from Asia or made by Asian companies with plants outside of the upper Midwest that are not union. It's another threat to the union because as EVs become more popular, the whole powertrain is now being made by somebody else who doesn't have union plants.
And the other thing that I think was said, I'm not sure whether it was said or reported outside of what was said, the pay rates at that plant are not going to be $31 an hour or whatever. It's going to be half,
17,
right?
the
So
parts
that's
rate.
again. I mean, anyway,
Yeah.
You want to do another topic?
Well, David just raised it, so keep going, brother. I mean, why is General Motors suing FCA? I know what they're saying. To me, it just doesn't pass the sniff test. And explain what's going on.
So, in case for the viewers who aren't fully aware, so there are obviously a lot of convictions and sentences given already to UAW leaders and FCA executives. They were basically raiding a union training fund for millions of dollars, all kinds of gifts. And the federal government in its, or the Justice Department rather, in its public documents is basically, one of the lines was FCA wanted to keep the union negotiators fat, dumb, and happy. Schneider also told us in the interview that they haven't totally concluded that this graft that FCA negotiators enabled so that the UAWs could raid those funds from gifts, expensive vacations, and so forth. They haven't concluded that it compromised the 2015 contract between FCA and the UAW, which set the pattern for Ford and GM. But that's what they're investigating. GM is suing, saying it absolutely did. That's why FCA set the pattern. It cost us extra money, and we should be compensated for it.
But up until GM said that, it was bragging to Wall Street about how well it was doing financially. In fact, it's hitting in North America with UAW work the highest profit margins it's had in my career.
So is it about the money?
So I think the timing is important in this too. I mean, this lawsuit that GM filed lands in the middle of Fiat Chrysler's attempt to merge with Peugeot. And the last thing that General Motors needs is a stronger Fiat Chrysler.
So you think they're trying to torpedo this merger?
It also lands in the middle of their labor talks.
Well, and it lands in the middle of their labor talks, although I guess they've managed to sort that out. It seems like they're on their way. But it lands in the middle of this merger. So look, General Motors says it has nothing to do with anything, but nonetheless, it lands in the middle of the merger. And it's one more thing that the bankers and the lawyers attempting to work on that are going to have to figure out, well, how much of a liability could there be? Do we have to reserve for it? Does it affect the valuation? It's just one more thing. And, that kind of is what it is. The optics of that are what they are. And we'll see how that all plays out.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's maybe a little personal, right? I mean, Carlos Tavares, who's running Peugeot, took over Opel and turned it profitable after 20 years of losses under GM. That has to sting.
And there was some bad blood, too. Didn't he say, hey, wait a minute, you guys stiffed me with some pension bills or something like that?
Well, there
was a fight over diesel.
Fight over diesel, fight over emissions, And then let's not forget, too, that there was bad blood between FCA. The late Sergio Marchionne was absolutely not well liked at General Motors.
Now we see why. Now
that he tried to take over. He wanted to force a merger.
To take over and force out Mary Barra and the manager. Anyway, there's plenty of competitive.
And Ram is beating Silverado, which
Yeah.
has to tick off everybody at the rent stand. They hate that.
No, but there is a legal piece to this, I think. Right?
Yeah.
Legal piece.
No, there's no question there's no question that there's a question. I guess it's let's put it this way. I wish that I were a actual manufacturing cost expert, because they're going to have to hire a bunch of them to figure out, right, how much is corruption and how much is just a difference in approach to management. But we'll see.
Yeah. So GM's case is that by buying off union workers so they could set the pattern, FCA stuck GM with a more expensive labor agreement. That's what everybody tries to do.
Right.
That's the point of labor talks. That's why you go first.
That's part of my
what
point.
GM did this year.
There's a game that's everybody's played. Go ahead. There's a game everybody plays. Yeah.
Right. And so, which is why GM, works very hard and often does get to go first and set the pattern. Right. So GM's going to have to prove which even the Justice Department hasn't concluded yet, that the bribes and all the graft let Fiat Chrysler set the pattern. Okay, that's problem number one.
Yeah, go ahead.
For them. And the other part is, the agreements do set a pattern, but they're never the same, right? Ford closed one plant, GM closed three. Ford paid workers $9,000 and GM paid them $11,000 to ratify the agreement. GM's main argument here is that they both had the same cap on Tier 2 workers, which at the time were much cheaper, but Chrysler got to ignore it. Again, but the pattern economics, the wages for everybody were the same. Chrysler just got this side deal that let them blow off the cap. So GM's going to have to prove that this wasn't just part of collective bargaining, that it really was the bribes that did that.
And GM also got the side deal to hire more Tier 2 workers for the small car plant. But there have been exceptions made all around.
Yeah, you play, but also, you play rough when you think there's a lot at stake. And I do think, and Carlos Tavares said this, and it was pretty memorable to me. Says we're looking at 10 years of chaos in the industry going forward, and not all companies are going to make it. And so if you look at why this kind of guns or knives stuff that's going on amongst all these different companies, it's because there's a thing 10 years from now, either the companies that are in the field today will not be in the field, or they will not be in the field in the same structure, size, and ownership that they are today. And if you say, well, my company, we would like to not be losers in this game. And so this is you see the fisticuffs, and the fighting, because not everyone's going to get through the narrow spot on the track.
Well, and the legal side of this, I think, is...
And quick, we're down to the end.
Look, Fiat Chrysler's been accused of emissions cheating on their sales numbers, and now this. I think, and when GM had their ignition switch problem, they hired Volukas, the attorney, to come in, do a report, do an independent audit, and FCA has not done that. I think GM's trying to send up a signal flare to the Justice Department that they've really got to make a big case out of this union investigation.
Man, we only scratched the surface of the list I had of topics to talk about. What a decade, what a wrap up to the year end. But I got to thank you guys. Joe White with Reuters, Jamie Butters with Automotive News, David Welch with Bloomberg News. Thanks, you guys. Very interesting.
Glad to be here.
Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
A lot of fun.
Underwriting for the production of Autoline This Week has been provided by RSM.
Prepare for challenges specific to your business by working with trusted advisors who help turn obstacles into opportunities. Experience the power of being understood. RSM, Audit, Tax, and Consulting for the Middle Market.